I'm going to lead things off by asking Tom. Tom, you've got a couple of drugs that you're working on. Now, you saw my figures. The glaucoma pharmaceutical world is pretty crowded. There are a lot of drugs, a lot of classes, and there are generics in every class. What value do you think you're going to bring by bringing two more drugs into the market? What makes your drugs better?
A lot of things, but I'll only talk about a couple. The good news is, Colin, we just finished market research around the world where we talked to 400 different physicians, so we've got a lot of voice behind this, the answer I'm giving you. We talked to 100 in Japan, 100 ophthalmologists also in Europe, and 200 in the US. What they told us was almost universal. What they liked about our products or captured their imagination is first our MOAs, and what our MOAs do. They like the fact that finally there's a glaucoma medication that tackles glaucoma where the disease really occurs. That's in the trabecular meshwork. We heard the same story, frankly, over and over again, where physicians, no matter what country they were in, sat there and told us, you know what it's like. A person has an IOP of 23, you put them on a medication, they're okay, you come back, and sooner or later their IOP does what? It starts creeping up. And they told us, why is that? Because they're not treating the heart of the disease, that is the trabecular meshwork. That's what they put a tremendous amount of hope around our Rho kinase inhibitor because it opens up the trabecular meshwork. The other thing they said that infatuated them was our ability of our products to lower pressures when patients have low baseline pressures. And when I shared some data with you, I'll just tell you one other bit. We did a PK trial on normal healthy volunteers. These are folks with an IOP of 16, was the mean IOP. Treatment of our drug lowered their IOP from 16 down to 11. And when we shared that data, it was like universal applause around the table, just tremendous excitement because of that ability to lower pressures at the low pressures and also perhaps treat the disease right at the trabecular meshwork.
Jay, you're familiar with these drugs. Can you comment on what Tom's just said? Do you think these drugs really hold promise for impacting patient care substantially?
Well, you know, what Tom just said was, I think, extraordinarily important, that you have a drug that has a new mechanism of action, and it seems to target the area of outflow where we think the pathology is in for at least most of the patients with open-angle glaucoma. But the reality is that, even though that's very exciting, the reality is that over half our patients being treated in the US are on more than one medication. So, you know, prostaglandins are just a wonderful class of drugs. They've done us a great service in treating our patients, but many patients, they either don't work well or they're not enough, and we want a new drug class. And it's been almost 20 years now since we've had a new drug class, so I'm terribly excited about using it in patients, and you're going to find clearly that there may be some patients that do better with this new class, perhaps the normal tension glaucoma patients or other patients that are going to benefit from it. So I think that's very exciting.
Russ, I'm going to ask you a question about the surgical market for glaucoma. You saw the figures, trabeculectomy, not real big numbers, and declining to some extent. Are you concerned about that, or does your product, if you're designing it to replace trabeculectomy, is there a market opportunity beyond just replacing trabeculectomy? And perhaps you could expound on what you made your comments earlier in your talk.
Yeah, no, I think our study is designed to show that we can replace trabeculectomy. Our US FDA study, and we're the only company that's taken on that effort to prove that. But our studies outside of the United States are going beyond that, and we're treating, as I presented earlier stage patients, and still have the same fantastic ability to lower pressure to that area where the studies have shown the patients need to be in order to no longer lose vision. And because of those results in the earlier stage patients, we're also hopeful that this technology will translate to usage in the NTG arena as well, because everybody's still banging their heads against the wall on that one. So, no, I think the trabeculectomy marketplace is maybe something we'll be able to wipe out in a weekend, but hopefully the next weekend, doctors will see that they can move it up the treatment regimen.
So, John, I'd like to ask you to comment on that. You know, MIGS really has two meanings. There's minimally invasive glaucoma surgery and micro-incisional glaucoma surgery. Certainly, the in-focus shunt is micro-incisional. Is this a MIGS procedure as well? Is this minimally invasive, and can this increase that bleb-forming surgery space, which has been small and shrinking in recent years? Is there an opportunity here?
Yeah, I think that the in-focus idea is a great idea, and I think that MIGS has done a lot of things to help reduce the pain points that there are in glaucoma surgery. First, there's the safety. Second, there's the efficacy. And now there's the sustainability. And we want to see how long these things are going to last. If your question is, does bloodless mean for sure that it's not minimally invasive or micro-invasive? I think that what's really going to determine that is this a safe procedure every time we do it? And if that's the case, then I think that it would fall into the category.
So you expect there'll be, if it's safer than trabeculectomy, you agree with Russ that there's a bigger opportunity than just replacing trabeculectomy here?
I do think that, but I think it's got to be safer, more than just safer than trabeculectomy. Trabeculectomy is not very safe. It has to be comparable to cataract surgery as an intraocular procedure in order to be MIGS, in my opinion.
But what about the additional benefit of these lower pressures that Russ talked about? Doesn't that offset perhaps the fact that you have a bleb in the eye, the fact you can get much better pressure goals?
I think that it does. I think that glaucoma is really categorized, in my mind at least, into two diseases. Gentleman's glaucoma, where you can kind of get away with not impressive efficacy, and then real glaucoma. And real glaucoma is the one where people go blind from it, and we need to get real low eye pressures to take care of that.
Okay. John, I got a question for you. You're doing a phase 2 study, a head-to-head study with the prostaglandin versus timolol. Say you come out about the same. Your ring gives you about the same as timolol, or you end up being in the same ballpark. Why should people get excited about that? And what's the big deal about matching timolol as far as IOP lowering?
Well, that's a good question. I think the issue here is these studies, these head-to-head studies are forced compliance studies. So the patient is required to take their daily drop observed at their 8 a.m. visit, and then we measure their pressures at 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock. And so hitting that standard with a single administration on day one that lasts through 6 months, I think is a compelling contribution to the treatment regime. Timolol and an active comparator will always be part of our studies going forward, but I think that the reality is it's forced compliance where we're trying to address non-compliance or poor compliance, and that's really hard to model in a clinical trial.
Great. Jay, you're familiar with compliance. You've written on this topic. You know the issues of non-compliance. How do you see John's product, the device that they're working on, the Helios, fitting into your practice?
Well, in glaucoma, that's to me one of the biggest unmet needs. The drugs that we have in glaucoma are wonderful, but the point that you've made and others have made this morning, the patients have to use it. And the reality out there is that probably half your patients out there in the real world, not in studies where they get the medications for free, not that they've been counseled and told that they have to take their medication. In the real world, half the patients aren't taking their medications on a regular basis. So I'd even take it a step further, and if John's product lowered pressure not even as much as prostaglandins in a head-to-head trial, I'd still be terribly excited about that because I know the patients are getting their drug on a regular basis with the device inside their eyes. So even if it doesn't even match in head-to-head trials, I would still be very anxious to get that product out there.
So just to end, I'm going to ask each of the three company leaders what keeps them up at night. Now, obviously, all company executives are worried about raising money and hiring good people, but beyond that, when it comes to the regulatory and commercial aspects of your business, I'd like to start with Tom and ask you what you worry about in this current day environment. And I know this looks like a therapy session. You're on a couch and I'm asking questions, but let's keep it to 1 minute because we're almost at lunch.
Okay, 1 minute. I'd say two things. One is, will the Cleveland Indians ever win again? The second thing is, what I worry about in our company is execution. I don't think any company is short on execution. They're frankly long on fantastic ideas, right? The problem is it comes down to execution. So if we execute like any other company, by God, we'll win.
Russ?
I think one of the real difficulties in any of these clinical trials is getting a protocol that's acceptable to the doctors, the patients, the companies, and FDA. And it's a real balancing act. And being able to have a protocol that allows you to enroll the right kind of patient at the right speed is key, or some of these trials will never end. So I think that's what's kept me up at night. We've made massive improvements in our protocol working with FDA and are in a fantastic place right now. But were it not for the willingness for the agency to change at some level, on some of those requirements and be willing to make the studies safer, it would be really tough.
John, you get the final word.
Thank you. So, what keeps me awake other than funding and personnel? I think staying focused on the patient as we go through this complicated dance of clinical trials and regulatory approval and fundraising, you have to stay focused on the patient for the entire process. If you lose sight of that, you've lost the game. We talked today about compliance. It's a real issue. It's an important issue. But I read an article recently that patients in our age demographic are often asked to do 3,000 steps a year to stay compliant with all of their medications and all of their comorbidities, whatever physical therapy they may need. It's a very complicated and demanding lifestyle to impose on an older person. So I think we need to be sensitive to patient need.
Well, I think it's time for lunch, and I want to thank all three of you for making fantastic presentations, and also for John and Jay to join the panel. We made up for time that Eric got us behind, so I'm really happy about that. Emmett?